Welcome back, everyone. This is, of course, a podcast to answer your questions on addiction, recovery, and mental health by Wiseman Method Opioid Treatment Specialists. I'm your co-host, Dwight Hurst, joined today by David Livingston and Claire Wiseman. We are here to answer your questions, and today, a very special question. It's a very delicate question. This question actually is sort of a conglomeration, an amalgamation of a lot of questions that we've gotten online. Periodically, I'll go and put out the call for questions that people might have regarding mental health, regarding addiction and dependence. And one of the things that we got as a request from many people was the question, do people use mental health problems as an excuse for poor behavior? This is a tough one to get into, especially for those of us that work in the field of mental health and psychological treatment, because you see a lot of this out there, and I think particularly when it pertains to addiction, there's sort of a reputation that addiction treatment has that if someone is caught, a celebrity as a scandal, they go into therapy. Somebody has a problem, they go into therapy. As people who work in therapy, we're not opposed to that, but is it ever used as an excuse? And probably more importantly, by people in general, other than people in great positions of power or notoriety. So we're going to dig into that and want everyone to kind of go with us on this because we want to be very, very compassionate and also very, very aware of the delicacy of it. And I think you'll see that in our talk today. So let's get into that right now. The question we're really looking at is mental health ever used as an excuse for poor behavior? And I think that's a broad question the short thing is, well, yeah. But then we're going to break that down more than just, yeah, obviously. And to say what that means, it's got a couple different wrinkles to it. But what's the initial reaction to that idea of do people use their mental health as an excuse for behavior?
So I would say this because a lot of what we talk about has to do with substance use. That not always, but very often if you talk to people and part, they understand that the substance use is not good for them and they want to give it up, especially by the time they're coming to see us and they're getting detoxed. They're here because of that. Very often, not always, but very often there is some ambivalence, right? They want to go back to it. There's something about it they liked. There is, and the thing that I don't like, because I think it prevents it prevents. The thing I don't like is the idea that it's a disease. And the reason I don't like it is because it prevents the treatment of it. Like if it's just a disease that you're stuck with, and how do you treat it, right? So like any disease, you have to understand what it is and how it operates. So in some ways, it does operate like a disease. So meaning that feelings which drive most of life, okay, tensions, anxiety, sadness, loneliness, happiness, fear, anger, everything is more automatic than it is a choice, right? We don't really choose what we feel as much as we discover it. So that is more of an automatic mechanism, and it's going to drive thoughts and feelings, or it's going to drive thinking as well. So, and then thinking has a similar component to it. Okay, so what happens is, as it comes back to this subject, and my long way of getting there, is that you have to understand that there is ambivalence towards most things in life. No matter what we do, we're going to have some ambivalence. Most people will have ambivalence about going to work. Part of them wants to go, needs to go. Hopefully you like it enough that you get some enjoyment about it. But because there is ambivalence, even ambivalence in giving up a substance that's been destructive, there's ambivalence. So part of what really growing up and becoming a mature adult is how we manage our ambivalence. Because it's a given. It's a given in even the best marriages, even the best relationships. How you manage that ambivalence has a lot to do with it. And if you feel like you don't have to do that, then you can make excuses for bad behavior. And sort of to bring it back to kind of the topic, you can just say, well, I'm anxious and I don't want to do it. Well, while anxiety exists on a continuum, and sometimes anxiety can be debilitating, part of what you have to develop and learn to manage step by step to grow and be a stronger human being. And I think as a culture, we have begun to not, like I was saying before, that the dynamic I see happening culturally and politically and in so many other ways is secure attachment versus sort of authenticity. So people will not say anything that goes against the dominant narrative, even within the field of psychology. And the idea is that empathy is always the thing that is going to help people and be the best thing. Empathy includes growing and getting stronger. It doesn't just mean that what you do is you allow yourself to regress. Sometimes regressing can be benign, like, okay, like I need a break and then I can get going again. That's fine. Everybody needs that. But you have to sort of parse that against the type of regression that has to do with a failure and a desire not to take on the challenges of life. To me, that's where this whole idea of bad behavior exists. A lot of what therapy should, from my perspective, be about step by step, slowly, at a pace that's manageable, be about sort of working towards making more resilient, more capable people. And honestly, I think it's the most compassionate thing.
There's a certain amount of identity or self-labeling, or maybe not even self-labeling. It seems like you're talking about the negative side of awareness, which is you can adopt a label on yourself. And I guess even getting back to the idea of what is or is not a disease. Is a disease something that I work with? Or is it a disease something I'm struggling with? Or does it become a label or an identity? I know we talk a lot on this show about the identity of addiction that can soak into people's, they view that as, oh, here's a deep character trait of mine. We've talked a lot about some of the problematic use of the label addict, where people will just adopt that as an identity, and that can interfere with their ability to believe that they can recover. It sounds a lot like what you're talking about now.
I think also there is that's where the difference between condition and disease comes in. When you call it a disease, I think it has, a stigma with it. I think it has a length, undetermined length with it. And when you call condition, it is almost like, the moment you're in, not who you are. And I think there's a huge difference right now. And I think especially for young adults, it's really, really important for them to understand. And so as parents and teachers, the difference between, judging somebody from the moment they're in, from who they are. There's a big difference. And you can be anxious at a moment, but doesn't mean you have an anxiety issue. Doesn't mean you have a disease. So is what David was saying to us. Part of the process is learning how to be resilient, is learning how to overcome feelings that stops us from progressing emotionally and physically and socially. So I think we right now in society, I'm very, very happy that we are discussing about mental health. I think we have to be very careful with the diagnosis made so fast, because diagnosis will label people, and with label comes stigma, and with stigma comes several factors that can stop people from progressing in their lives. So it's, I think the mental health condition cannot be inflated to justify a number of different behaviors, and at the same time has to be taken very serious to understand so many serious behaviors that affects our society.
There's a real connection between mental health and judgment, and mental health and accountability, and trying to look at what is that. It's one of these things where it's not a clear-cut either or. It's not like, well, my mental health doesn't influence my choices at all. On the other hand, as you're saying, it's not like, oh, my mental health is responsible for my choices either. And to that point of diagnosis, like you're saying, of actually trying to figure out what a problem is and what is going into that problem, it's much more nuanced than kind of one or the other. Does that make some sense? I guess it's the question of what is our relationship between our mental health status and our own judgment and accountability and ability to make choices.
Well, that makes perfect sense. I mean, so the whole process of a treatment is you pull these things apart, right? So if somebody's anxious and they say, and that's a cause of problems in their life, you have to understand what is causing the anxiety. Is it situational? Is it more biologically driven? Is it emotions that have been repressed and need to be titrated and understood and felt in order for them to become fluid again and actually be felt and become emotions rather than anxiety? And so so those are the causes primarily of anxiety. And as you get into this with people and you pull these things apart, what you find is what has been a label. Oh, I have anxiety. Now all of a sudden you understand and you pull apart what is the anxiety, what is it? And once somebody begins to see how it operates and why it's operating that way, you have a whole different way of participating. And then you begin to know what to do. Well, you don't sleep well, so you haven't slept well in years. Go get a sleep study. You're going to be anxious if you sleep 2 hours a night. I would be. And you're not going to feel good. And by the way, you're not going to want to exercise also, which brings anxiety down. So bad behavior is a way, or often means that people just don't know what to do. Most of the time when I'm talking to someone, they'll say, yeah, I've been diagnosed with anxiety. And I'll ask, do you know what the anxiety is or what causes it? 99% of the time they say, no, what do you mean? There's been a diagnosis of anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, but they have no idea of what's causing it.
I've met many people who have a copy of a document that's a huge diagnostic evaluation, and when they'll say, okay, let's look at the results and what do you think this means? A lot of times they'll say, oh, no one's ever talked to me about that before. Then this is something that maybe took them 2 or 3 days of going in and taking tests, and then took another month while they waited for someone to type up the report. And then it's just handed to them. Yeah, I think that's an error in a lack of education.
We're 10 times, 100 times better at diagnosing than we are at treating. Therein lies where the gap is, if you ask me, is that the art and the process of a treatment and really sort of getting in and pulling apart all these things and understanding what it takes to help someone become an alive human being who can manage and knows what to do when they're sad or they're lonely or they're afraid or they're struggling at work or in a marriage or whatever it is, that there's, and has an ability to tolerate that aspect of life, knows what to do, can seek help when they need it, and that's no small thing, but ultimately, otherwise people regress, and we're kind of beginning to say that's when you get a lot of bad behavior. That's kind of a giving up.
I mean, everybody should feel and should be able to talk about it, but we have to be careful not to overinflate these feelings where we paralyze the person. It absorbs the person to a point where they are not able to tolerate that feeling anymore. some kids feel anxious, so they should do their tests at home. I mean, we are really removing from this society coming in every ability to tolerate any uncomfortable feelings. So what's going to happen is what we see. They end up self-medicating with, drugs because they can't stand and they can't handle how they feel. I was speaking to a parent yesterday, and she described this 26-year-old kid that, graduated college, that is able to be a productive member of society as somebody that will never be able to live a normal life. And that's her view. So,
and then that
again,
becomes a limiting, it just, once again, it's labeling, right?
Of course. And I think that's where a lot of these kids are overwhelmed with their feelings because they don't know what to do with them. Because I think the level of, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable has, the lines have been crossed. So, again, what is having a mental health issue? What is a mental health condition? How broad is the spectrum? I don't want by any means to undermine those that really have debilitating issues. I'm scared that we are causing not being able to tolerate a uncomfortable feeling. Doesn't even need to be a stressful feeling, just not being comfortable. And we receive the best rewards are those that are more difficult to achieve.
One of the things that we're kind of bumping into is a term of over-pathologizing too, right? It's kind of interesting as we have learned more about diagnosis, and in one way the intention is to be able to understand where we're all coming from and why we think the way we do. But sometimes we then over-pathologize. And, it's interesting to me that, for example, if you're someone who is diagnosable with OCD, even if you're in a healthy range, you probably might have a little bit more of a compulsive nature. And so it's trying to return not to a person who doesn't have any trait of anxiety or compulsion, but trying to put that within a normal, healthy range, because we all have compulsions. It's just that they don't dominate our lives. And so if one person is on a spectrum of maybe being more anxious, or maybe I'm a person who thinks of things, differently than other people do, maybe I'm in a healthy range. And when I'm in an unhealthy range is when I need treatment. I don't need to always be labeled as someone who is always OCD or always an anxiety person, if that makes any sense. I think that over-pathologizing, sometimes we want to chalk everything that's an eccentricity or a personality trait and put it into the diagnosis that a person has.
I think there's a huge emphasis in society, especially right now, on what is lacking in a person and not on their strengths. I think we're concentrating on, how to justify and, in a way, help accept not achieving, instead of finding ways to empower this person to achieve everything they can. And not because society wants you to achieve, because those are the things that makes us feel self-sufficient. Those are the things that brings us, self-esteem, strength. So I think we are really removing this from this new generation, the ability to be proud of themselves.
So just to ramp this up to even a higher level, okay? I mean, even just to like, I mean, okay, so the core conflict in OCD is repressed sadistic wishes. Okay, so if you say that to somebody with OCD, you will terrify them. Okay, because first of all, the word sadistic terrifies most people. Okay, but just to bring this around in terms of a literally how you would treat someone and what it actually means in making somebody healthy. So let's say I'm right, okay, and this isn't my idea. This is what's taught within psychoanalytic thinking, and I've treated many people with OCD, and you'll find it. Okay, so here's what it actually means, though, in a treatment. The great thing is they're terrified of the part of them that humor is based on sadistic wishes. You needle people, right? That's all great humor is based on that. And if you want to be successful and as a tennis player or in sports, you have to have a killer instinct, enjoy to some degree within the bounds of good sportsmanship, beating the other person, right? And so what happens is the treatment of it is actually you get to help somebody feel like the part of them that is overly concerned about that part of themselves is absolutely human, fine, and part of what is going to help them laugh more, be more playful, be more, needle people and tease people. Everything's within a range, right? And I'm not talking about bullying people or destructiveness or violence. I'm not talking about anything like that. But it's about the lightening up. And what happens is, and it's no wonder I see an increase in this because everybody's terrified of any of those thoughts and feelings now. So anxiety's running through the roof, especially in the early generations. So the great thing is this is part of what it means to be a fully alive human being. And so once you begin to understand it from that perspective, you're just making people more alive. And by the way, if you don't do that, whatever is human in terms of our sadistic wishes will come out in unconscious ways towards ourselves, meaning that what happens is people with OCD as a container for those feelings will end up spending time doing whatever the activity is that contains that part of themselves, or it will come out in an unconscious way, which will then maybe be more than they wanted it to be and then terrify them, and they'll have more of the symptoms. So the idea is that we're trying to make people a dynamic, alive human being, conscious of it. It is fun. I played tennis last night with some people and happened to win and quite enjoyed it. Right. And so and you don't do it and 2 weeks ago I lost to the same people and they quite enjoyed it. And it's just like that. So anyway,
there's a mental health advocate who does, her name's Sharon Glady. She was the health minister for Manitoba, Canada for many years. Now she writes and presents and teaches. And one of the things that she often talks about is a concept of saying how if you want to look at it as if you were looking at a comic book, you're looking at a superhero, right? And you look and say the superpower and the weakness of that character, and now pretend those are the same thing. Our weaknesses are also our superpowers in a way, right? So just like what you're saying, right? We have that, is there something inside me that gets into an unhealthy range? That's my weakness. But when I return to a healthy range, I might still have certain characteristics that could be misidentified, right? It's like saying, yeah, an anxious person, you do research on this, and people who tend to score high in anxiety also score very high in traditional IQ, right? And because if you think about it, anxiety has to utilize memory, ability to think through things. If I'm going to worry about something that is very, very advanced, then I'm going to need a lot of smarts to be able to do that, is the idea. So to look at it and say, getting within a healthy range is the goal, not to change who the person is.
Well, or to remind them of the totality, exactly what you're saying. It's a balance. But within that, we all lose track of parts of ourselves, and we need mirrors. We need someone to say, no, that's fine, right? That's okay. Or, maybe that's a little strong in this situation, or, right, like you're saying, and we need mirrors for that.
Yeah.
I think a good title for this podcast should be, how to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Right.
That's an interesting thought. Say a little more about that, Claire, if you would.
It's that simple. It's learning to be comfortable when you're feeling uncomfortable, when you're feeling, uncomfortable feelings that you're not at ease. Is learning that that is momentary, and how to get over it, how to see the bigger picture and not just concentrate on that feeling. Now, how not to internalize and actually identify with that feeling that, might destroy your path. So it's really putting things at the right proportions, I think. Right, David? Being able to keep your negative feeling at a certain base level. And I think concentrating on the positive and not so much on the negative and using as a justification is probably your best bet. And I think that's part of society right now.
You and I may disagree on this one thing. I don't like the word positive and negative, because I think it splits the world into,
Agreed.
I just when I look at it, I'm just like, because I could give you an example of everything having the potential of being positive and negative.
I agree 1,000%.
Yeah, exactly right. So what we're, like you were saying, Dwight, it's just finding the range, right? And so what we're all doing, and in talking to each other and in dialogue and stuff is hopefully we're learning, right? And so but yes, it's like, yes, that's it.
That was it.
That's it.
He said it all.
Right.
The way my brain works, it's like it gets on a tilt and then that's it.
I think if I can say something is that nobody expects anybody to completely avoid certain feelings, but I think we can learn to soothe them when needed, and to make our life just easier to live. Concentrate more on our strengths, and as you said, the things that we fear the most might be the ones that will provide us the biggest strength to keep on going.
We're going to leave that there. Thank you so much for being here to listen. Just by listening, you are participating in the discussion and helping the cause that we're trying to push for, and also helping us to share the word. One way that you can help is go on to your podcatcher of choice. If you're on Apple Podcasts, if you're on Spotify, if you're on wherever you're on, check and see. Many of them have a rating feature. If you're able to give us a high rating, 4 or 5 stars on Apple or wherever you are, it does help the show to get shared with other people. You can also directly share the show with people, and that helps quite a bit as well. One of the things we need is your involvement. We need your questions, and we're very excited to get those when we get them. You can tweet those questions at us at Opiates, or you can email info@opiates.com. This podcast is, of course, a production of Weisman Method Opioid Treatment Specialists. You can learn more about us at opiates.com. This show is a production of Pop Collar Productions, helping you to launch your own podcast and get your message out there. Our music is Medical by Clean Mind Sounds. For Claire Weisman and David Livingston, I'm Dwight Hurst. Please join us next episode, where we'll be digging deeper into your questions. And always remember, keep asking questions. If you can ask questions, then you can find answers. And whenever you find answers, you can find hope.